how can I know if my music is good? This question and how I thought about the answer for it really set me back, I feel, for a good 3 or 4 years. I went through a period of time where I loved the music that I was making, but I didn't think others would love it, or I was too insecure about it, so I never showed it to anyone, never released it, nothing. Which, thinking back on it, is kind of ridiculous. But this is still a legit question I used to ask myself a ton, and I'm sure you do too. But over time, I eventually came up with 3 tests. And these tests kind of became my standards of whether or not my music was good, good enough to release. I still write a ton of garbage, but it chills on the hard drive. So I'm going to talk about these tests that I do, starting with the most concrete and actionable tests, and then moving towards the more philosophical tests at the end. Starting with referencing. Get some music that you consider to be good in a wave format, and then see where that falls as far as loudness in LUFS or overall frequency balance, and then try to match that. Don't blindly try to match it though. You can destroy your mix by just trying to get the frequency curve to match the reference tracks. That's not what you want. What you want to do actually brings me to my second point, which is get in the ballpark. You do not have to match the reference perfectly when it comes to mixing, arrangement, loudness, anything. You just need to use it as a baseline to see how you might want to adjust your track. Set up an external audio out channel. So say you've got a song and say you've got some things going on the master chain. Well, we need an audio channel that's not affected by that master chain so we can do a true comparison. Most DAWs have a way to do this, but in Live, all you need to do is set up a new audio channel and select the output to external out. Now nothing on the master chain is affecting any audio that plays on that track. Reference tracks in the same key. Tom Finster, who is an incredible and inspirational artist, mentioned this on a feedback stream once, and it totally blew my mind, and I've been using it ever since. Referencing tracks in the same key is important because the balance in your low end and low mids is majorly dependent on the notes that are being played. You might want to mix your low end material a little bit differently depending on what key it's in and kind of what the root subnote is going to be. So getting a reference in the same key can be really, really helpful, especially if you're listening in a less ideal environment like a bedroom. Reference in mono and stereo. This is a pretty basic tip, but one that is so crucial. Splitting tracks into their center and side information and then comparing the two can make it blatantly obvious if there are huge differences between your tracks and the reference. You don't need to match the reference exactly here, of course, but what you want to do is just see the overall balance being similar in the center and side channels. Reference specific bands. Similarly to the last tip, filtering out most of the frequency band and just focusing on a certain range can make differences between your track and the reference so obvious. Because your ears don't have to listen through all of this other information and they can just focus on the area that you're targeting. Lastly, reference on a variety of systems. My preferred method is Dropbox. I have an exports folder synced directly to Dropbox, so the moment that Live is done exporting a track, I can access it on my phone and play it on a Bluetooth speaker, in my car, or really any other system. I can honestly say that referencing music that I think is good against my own music, it was one of the most painful but helpful experiences I've had thus far in music production. But if you're willing to push through the uncomfortableness of this experience and keep doing it and incorporate it into your practice, you will get so much better. It's actually insane. And now we move on to feedback. Getting feedback from other producers is almost a skill in its own. Around the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of producers started up feedback streams, and I would submit to as many of these as I could. And at first, I found myself getting kind of, butthurt or having an emotional response if somebody told me my lead had a little bit too much 4K hertz in it or whatever, But doing it more often, I built up kind of a tolerance, and I could kind of hear the feedback for what it was and not how it made me feel. And at that point, a lot of the feedback started to be really helpful. And then I was able to, go into the studio, trying out other people's feedback and finding a lot of great techniques and leveling up my sound that way. And after a little while, I discovered a couple of things, some simple ideas to just keep in mind. And the first one is that the person you are getting feedback from is bringing their own taste and their own experience into the feedback. And do not discount this. If you send a melodic techno track to a dubstep producer, they're going to tell you to make it sound a little more dubsteppy or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, know who you're getting feedback from, and so take it a little bit with a grain of salt. Also, make sure you're not getting feedback in an echo chamber. What I mean by this is if maybe you and your friends are all making music and you're all making the same types of music, and those are the only people you're getting feedback from, then you might be limiting yourself in terms of different styles. Try to get other producers' feedback regardless of genre, because even in other genres, if it doesn't, exactly pertain to the style that you're trying to make, there's going to be other things that are staples in that genre, and they might include some of that in their feedback. And some of that stuff is really, really good to try, because it either A, gives you kind of a stylistic advantage over people. It makes you stand out a little bit. Or B, there's just ways that other genres deal with problems, and those solutions can be helpful no matter what genre you're making. The other thing I'll say too, if you have a little bit of disposable income, is that if there's producers who are doing one-on-one sessions or paid feedback, that has always been so worth the money to me. At least a handful of times a year, I see some producers that I really, really love who I really love their music, and they're doing a one-on-one session or feedback, and I will always send in some tracks, because not only will they be able to give you really specific and granular feedback, but also, if you get a good reaction out of them, it's kind of like a little bit of an ego boost, like, a little bit of a motivation boost. Of course, you want to be careful. You don't want to let your ego get out of hand, but it can be nice sometimes to have that little motivation boost of like, oh yeah, I think I'm doing a good job. And this person that I love their music also thinks I'm doing a good job. I'm not crazy. But arguably some of the most important feedback I think you'll get is from non-producers. Oftentimes this feedback won't be so telling as to, how the track sounds, but more how the track feels. They can tell you when the vibe is off, if you will. After all, vast majority of people who listen to music are not producers. So this feedback is really, really helpful as to whether or not your main idea is coming across. And my last little tip for this feedback section is have some things in your song that you think you need improving upon. And when you ask for feedback on the track, don't mention that thing to the person you're asking. So this way, that if they do mention that, like, oh, that snare is a little bit loud, then in your head, okay, for sure that snare is too loud. I just did basically a little experiment with this other person. And now I'm confirming that, oh yeah, that snare is too loud. Let me go in. I'll turn it down a little bit. Of course, you don't want to do this for everything, because then at some point you kind of lose what makes your track unique. So there's some things that, you want to stick to your guns on. You don't want to just be changing everything, because that's what shows your taste. The last thing to check is the feeling. And honestly, this is everything. This third and final piece of this whole good music puzzle, and what took me the longest to figure out, was how do you feel about your own music? Having an honest conversation with yourself about how good you think your music is and how it stacks up to the music that you love will clear up a lot of things. You could have music on your hard drive that millions of people would think is fantastic, but if you don't feel good about the entire process, from finalizing, distributing, promoting the track, everything becomes an uphill battle when you don't fully believe in your own music. And if you don't think your music is good, that's okay. Don't feel pressure to release your music just because you have it. I have a hard drive full of crappy old songs that will never see the daylight, but that's okay, because every time I sat down and wrote one of those songs, I gained so much valuable experience. What really changed it for me was a buddy of mine, Joel Cruz, said to me, don't think about how the music sounds, think about how the music feels. And after being wrapped up in the technical side of music making, as it's easy to do, and especially in electronic music, I feel, I hadn't asked myself that question in years. Of course, the technical stuff still plays a huge part in how your idea comes across. But if there's no feeling in the song and there's no piece of your soul in it, then I don't know if you'll ever convince yourself fully that you think your own music is good. This third step, stage, test, whatever you want to call it, is the most important one by far. Because what you consider to be good music is your taste. And writing your own music is your taste personified, put into a 3-minute long MP3. So sometimes you just need to throw out everyone else's opinions and just put out what you fucking like.